Hello, I'm Llewellyn King. I'm one of the founders and hosts of MECFS Alert, along with Deborah Woroff in New York. I'm speaking to you from Washington, D.C., and I'm continuing our conversation with Dr. Leonard Jason of DePaul University in Chicago. Leonard, you've mentioned to me in other conversations, the last episode of this program actually, that you were quite impressed with what the Japanese are doing. That leads me to this question. Some diseases have been treated quite differently in Asia with good results. I mean, we think of acupuncture and things like that. Are there Asian treatments for MECFS that we have not tried in this country?
We really don't know in terms of empirically validated kind of efforts. We recently did a review of non-pharmacological alternative medicine treatments that was published in a journal this year. And we found that two of the most promising ones had to do with Qigong and meditation. Certainly right now, I would say that there's a need for good, rigorous research to find out what works.
I know what meditation is. What's Qigong?
It's a different way of kind of moving one's body in accordance with some ancient principles that allow one to do energy conservation.
And do you feel that this, have you tried any of this yourself?
Yes, I have.
With good results? Or?
You know, I think that I have a belief in a thing called the energy envelope, that if one can stay within sort of one energy that one has and not exceeding it, that one ultimately can build up that energy battery, that stamina, that kind of, that battery that has sort of in some ways been very much diminished in many people with this illness. So anything that I think that is restorative, that allows one to pace, that allows one to monitor and sense one's energy level and stay in tune with that, I think can be very helpful with this illness.
In a previous interview, you said you were impressed with the way the Japanese were approaching the disease. What do you mean by that?
They have basically looked at all different aspects of the illness, from kind of physiological to what's going on in the brain, to what's going on in the neuroendocrine system, to what's going on in the immune system. That's not to say that we don't have some excellent researchers in this country. People like Ben Nadelson has been doing some fascinating research, helping us differentiate Lyme disease from CFS illness.
Have you found any indication that there are different populations are differently affected? Is there an ethnic dimension to this?
We have found that rather than the yuppie illness, flu, that sometimes had been called in the 1990s, that individuals who have higher incomes are not more likely to have this illness. Actually, people from lower socioeconomic status, people with more poverty, are more likely to have the illness. We've also found that minority groups actually have more of this illness than people who are non-minority, Caucasian whites. Now, the reason that we don't understand this is because, the people who go to the tertiary care centers and knock on the doors and try to get a diagnosis tend to have more resources, tend more to be white, tend more to be counted in studies. But when you do community-based studies, when you take the physicians and the medical personnel out of the case ascertainment method, you actually find differential rates of illness where minorities and the poor are overcounted and actually have higher prevalence than individuals who don't have this.
What would you like in the communities? What would you like to see done? You've done a lot of work with drug addiction, for example, where there are community solutions or post-addiction solutions. Are there community solutions for the sick people? Does it help people with CFS to know other people with CFS?
I think the two things that are most critical is one is legitimization of this illness. It's still not legitimized in many people's minds, whether they're healthcare professionals, even some family members, school officials. So how does one, in a sense, possibly think about changing the name, as you've said, from chronic fatigue syndrome to something more medically sounded like myalgic encephalomyelitis, which has been used in Great Britain and other European countries for many years. And the second issue is when people are very sick and have legitimization of this illness, then do we have a healthcare system that allows us to uniquely deal with their needs? And this is a very sick, this is a very impaired group of individuals. They need the best of medical care, multidisciplinary treatments, not the kind of treatments that's shunned off to one professional, particularly psychiatry or psychology. By treating everybody with this illness with one particular type of treatment modality doesn't work. But it wouldn't work with any type of chronic health condition, so why would it work with this one?
You are a psychologist rather than a medical doctor, which gives you a different perspective. And yet in Britain, the patients are very angry. In fact, there's been a tremendous fuss there over the attitude of the National Health Service that this is totally a psychosomatic disease. How do you answer your fellows in the field of mental health who've taken this attitude?
Well, I think that if we had patients with cancer or patients who have HIV infection and possibly AIDS, and patients who have heart disease, and they were brought to a professional, and the professional basically tried to argue with them that their illness was psychogenically caused and was psychological, the patient community would be in an uproar. And I think that's not the way to start a therapeutic relationship with patients. I think to legitimize the patient's concerns, to legitimize the patient's understanding of the etiology of their illness, to legitimize the patient's understanding of what they got is really the starting point of medicine. And I think that unless we get back to doing good medicine, where we basically respect and have patients in a respectful alliance with each other, with the therapist, with the medical doctor, with the healthcare team, and the patient, that's the way you start a respectful dialogue. That's what medicine is based on. If that doesn't occur, then you have significant problems. And I think that has happened in many places in Europe.
Do you think we've reached a point yet where there can be a published diagnosis so that physicians, general practitioners in particular, who treat this very poorly, can identify it earlier on?
I think that the 6-month period of waiting is a problem. Maybe for research purposes, I think it helps to have a period of time. But certainly, if a person has to wait that long to actually get appropriate treatment, you might have lost the best ideal time to actually intervene. Getting there early, treating appropriately with good comprehensive treatment might be the best way of helping individuals not get so sick and so impaired that their immune system is damaged, where it's hard to have a full type recovery. So I guess what I'm suggesting is that, yes, the case definition is critical. Any type of science starts with trying to differentiate who has an illness, who doesn't have an illness. And if you can't do that diagnostic system reliably, then it's like a house of cards. That bottom level has to be solid because everything else is built on it. Epidemiology, treatment, etiology is based on trying to decide who has an illness, who doesn't. So that case definition, that diagnostic enterprise, is the most critical enterprise that any scientist or clinician can be involved in. And we still have more work that needs to be done in this area.
We will get back to the subject in a future episode, but for now, can you extend any hope to people who are felled by chronic fatigue syndrome and who suffer year after year, decade after decade? Some of the correspondence I get is absolutely awful, the suffering that is reported to me.
Yes, there is a tremendous amount of suffering. I get phone calls from people who have had a tremendous amount of education, high-powered jobs, that are living in a car and that have been abandoned by their family and the healthcare system. I know that there's many people that have been, so many things have been taken away from them. And I think there's nothing more important to have that sense of hope, that there is tomorrow, that there is a possibility that there will be a way of us understanding this illness. I basically believe that an optimistic view is critical, and anybody who deals with patients or deals with the community on this level needs to sort of believe that, in a sense, we can make a difference. Because if we really believed that we couldn't make a difference, then think about all the other types of major illnesses and what would have happened if people didn't get behind some efforts to make a change. And HIV, AIDS community is a perfect example.
We'll talk in the future about other aspects of chronic fatigue syndrome, where there is hope, where there is promise, and what needs to be done now. I love a story that is ascribed to Winston Churchill. I don't know if it's true. I haven't been able to establish that he actually said this, but I can easily believe that he did. And that is when he was a very old man. He summoned his gardener and he said, "I want to plant an oak tree here." And the gardener, looking at how decrepit he was, said, "Well, sir, you know, it would take 100 years to grow." And Churchill allegedly said, "Well, you had better plant it now." So be it with CFS.